Good morning. Tom Johnson, along with our mayor, Alex Rounaghi, for another edition of Stu News Fair Game. Um, Mayor, good to see you.
Great to see you.
Kind of a busy week around town. I mean, you got, and we're going to get to these. You finished up with your special meeting last week on the Promenade. You
Yep.
got a big protest in town. You've introduced a new fire engine. Just a couple of things, a few of the things I want to talk to you about. But let's start with the big issue in the middle of last week was you had a special meeting on the Promenade on Forest. You rejected the appeal. What does that mean now? So if that's been rejected, what are the next steps?
Yeah, so the next steps, as I understand the process, is to have basically a higher level of construction drawings, and just more details in the plans beyond what's, because you have the conceptual, which was approved by the city council in terms of design and everything. But now it's about like kind of getting into the specifics of how you actually build it. And that will help us come up with a cost estimate and, allows for us to move forward. With that, there's a potential, I've heard that there might be an appeal of the promenade to the coastal commission, and so I don't know. I mean, there's an appeal period, so that could potentially happen, which could potentially delay it. But I think what's good about, our city manager and our approach is that we are all about, early and upfront engagement with the Coastal Commission. And so I would think that, when you read the staff report, you look at the clear body of evidence that supported the city council's decision as it relates to the coastal development permit. And so my hope would be that the Coastal Commission um, you know, agrees with the city council based on the overwhelming body of evidence in support of, making the findings for the coastal development permit. So that could delay it, but I think the next step would basically be construction drawings, budget, and going from there. And then I think probably as part of that, there will be discussions about, how do we mitigate the impact on the surrounding businesses and how do we do this in the smartest way possible.
So let me ask you a question. I mean, one of the great things about living in a country like the United States is it is lawful to have a differing opinion on things.
Yeah.
Does it ever get frustrating from an elected standpoint on an issue, and this is just one of many, but where you decide on something, you go through and you make all the appropriate hearings and things like that. You get a formal appeal, you reject the formal appeal after a hearing. Does it get frustrating along the way not to just be able to move ahead, jumping forward with both feet?
Well, absolutely it does. And I think that's why a lot of people get disillusioned with government is the pace at which things go. And sometimes it just feels like we're doing process for the sake of process. That's not to say that I think it's very important that people have a chance to be heard and that, their input should be considered and there should be appeals processes, right? I think that is important. But I think the key here is that it's done in a timely way where it's not, a multi-month delay to this. And, that's the process that we have, I think. Yeah, so it gets frustrating, but I think it's part of it, but it also, we should be always looking from the local perspective. How can we, you know, improve our processes and streamline them in a way that makes sense, where we can actually maximize public input while, making products happen quicker? Because actually what I found is sometimes the public doesn't like the fact that they have to show up to five different hearings on an issue, because who wants to go to five hearings where they'd rather have a very clear, actually a quicker answer on a question where they know, okay, there's a defined time for me to get involved with this process. I can get involved, weigh in, and then a decision can be made.
Well, and also I think that, a lot of people have come out, in favor of this issue in town. So if I'm one of those people that is in favor of this issue,
Yeah,
I want to see it happen so I can enjoy it.
I agree. And I think that's part of, yeah. So we need to make things happen quicker in government. It's a huge, huge thing to prioritize.
Okay, so we talked about the appeal process and everything. Another way to have your voice heard is through the means of protest. And
Yep.
protest was kind of the name of the game around the country last weekend, and Laguna Beach was definitely a part of that. Talk to me about the protest. Did you happen to witness any of that? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so stepping back, I really try to be focused on local issues when I'm in my city council capacity because I think that what a lot of people at the local level do is they talk, they get involved in Israel and Palestine, they get involved in, every national issue, and that's really not our job. We don't have the power to make, to have an impact there. What we have the power to do is make the city the best it could be and re get back to the basics in terms of public safety, right? How do we prevent wildfires, fully fund our law enforcement, invest in technology to prevent crimes? How do we invest in our infrastructure of a 100-year-old city? How do we make government more efficient, make it where people have better experiences when they're dealing with our, community development department and all the above, and how do we put, so that's really my focus. But with that being said, the first thing that you do when you're a city council member is you take an oath of office to the United States, to the Constitution of the state of California and the Constitution of the United States. And, I really think a lot about the quote by Benjamin Franklin when after the founding fathers when they were writing up the Constitution, someone asked him, they said, are we going to be a monarchy or are we going to be a democracy? And he answered, a republic if you can keep it. And so I think all of us as citizens, have an obligation to do what we can to keep, this country, which is the greatest country in the world, what makes it so special, which I think is our rights and our exceptionalism. And so what we saw this weekend, I was able to witness it, was a very peaceful protest where there were American flags that were being waved. There were people with you know not coming at it from a negative perspective, but coming at it from a perspective of this country is so great and we need to keep it that way, and raising their voice. And I think that's there's no evidence of anything that was disruptive as part of this protest. Very peaceful. I think it was around 2,500 people. And so I think as residents, whether you were, against the message that the protesters were putting forward or for it, we should all be proud that we are able to have a very peaceful protest and not have to, you know, put law enforcement in harm's way. And I also want to give a, shout out to our police officers who were there to keep everyone safe, and they did a really good job as they always do. So I think it was a good day for Laguna. You look at what was happening in other areas around the country, and it was not necessarily with that protest, but just with everything that's going on with ICE and everything. And there never should be violence when it relates to protests. So I think everyone should be proud of the way that that was handled.
You know, I totally agree with you. And yes, I commend our police department once again for, answering the call and, not being a part of the issue, but just managing the protest gathering in a great manner. That being said, there's a divisiveness in this country
There
that
is.
is fairly large. Um, what are your thoughts on that? And
Yeah.
does that impact the community at all?
Well, I think what we see at the national level is tribalism, where it's like you're on one side or you're on the other, and there's no effort to find compromise and common ground on the most important fa issues facing this country. Our national debt, for example, is just continues to increase, and what we really need is some sort of a bipartisan solution to figure out how we can move forward. We're looking at China on the rise. Um, that poses a threat. We're looking at how do we make it where people in this country feel like they don't have the chance to live up to the American dream like their parents did. How do we bring that back? And what you see is just politicians where they're always just looking for the soundbite on MSNBC or Fox News as opposed to figuring out how do we actually, find, solutions to very complex problems. And I think that there's divisiveness among our politicians, but I would say that I think like most Americans actually agree on the basics that, you know, on the things I just described. They want common sense solutions. They're in the middle. They're not on the extreme. And so, to your question about how does this affect us locally, I think locally, what my goal is that we could be a model for really positive civil discourse. We can be all about how do we find common ground? How do we still move things forward? Because I think also don't want to just be, making compromises for the sake of compromise if it doesn't make any sense and it just, leads to analysis paralysis and nothing getting done. So we really need to get important things done in the city. But at the local level, I think what we can do is make this a model for how government can work efficiently, effectively, and collaboratively with the community and all the relevant stakeholders to really solve some complex issues that are facing the city of Laguna Beach. And my hope would be that at the national level, that things can improve, where we get away from this, this chaos and governing in a way that is just in many respects lacks stability and focus on the rule of law, public safety, and how do we get back to the basics with our government and deal with our long-term challenges.
Cool. Mayor, you're either one of the great orators of this century, or you give a lot of thought to this. And I'm sure it's the latter of the two. Not that you can't speak very well, but it's obvious that you give a lot of thought to this. Question locally.
Yeah.
I saw on social media the other day, jumping back to the protest, that some of the restaurants in town closed for operation
Yep.
since then. Um, and do you know, have we had any issues in town where ICE has actually come in and made any arrests or, impacted any people locally?
Yeah, so it's this is one of those things where I've heard there's been a lot of rumors. I've heard people say that they've been at multiple restaurants and that they were going to, different hotels. There's no based on, and I would just confirm with the city manager, I'm not aware of any ICE presence that has been in Laguna Beach, or at least an active presence so far. I think that a lot of people, a lot of the workers, are responding to basically like the chaos that's been created, where it's just sort of a free for all that I don't really understand why. I think the goal of we should be going after, criminals, but we should not be going after the workers and the people who really make our economy run. I think that's anti-business. I think it's also anti, rule of law in the sense that you don't want people to be just scared running around. That's not helpful for anyone. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And going back to what I was saying to your earlier question, I think this is an issue where we really need to find some common ground as it relates to immigration, where we need to have a secure border, absolutely. We also need to have, people who are been part of this country for so long and a part of our workforce and are doing the jobs that, you know, but I mean, when you talk to restaurants, they can't find people to fill jobs. And so if we got rid of our immigrant workforce, that would be a huge issue. And so that's why, Saturday morning I was having coffee with someone at Zinc, and I was going to get food, but then they said, "Oh, the kitchen's closed. None of the workers are here." And so I think, we're a nation of immigrants, but we're also a nation of laws. So we need to enforce the law and secure the border. Absolutely. But we need to do it in a smart and compassionate way, as opposed to a political way, which it feels like is sort of happening now, where it's basically, I mean, why would you go to like Home Depot to get, to target people, which is, I guess, what happened in Santa Ana. Why are you going after the people who are working hard to support their families, to contribute to our communities? Go after the people who are committing crimes and endangering public safety. But this idea of just going after, the people who make our economy work and who are part of our community, I find just totally illogical and just, not very smart. And so I hope that we can find a way where people don't have to be living in fear, because I can't imagine what that would be like. And I hope that, long term we can find a way where there's a reasonable and common sense approach, like what happened under Ronald Reagan, with immigration.
So as the senior leader of elected leader of this community, are are you or is the city advised on if ICE were indeed to come to the city? Are you guys advised that that's going to happen?
At this point, we are not advised that will happen, and I don't know if we would be advised. I think it's an important thing to point out that it's not, ICE can do whatever they want, right? The federal government has ultimate supremacy, so it's not really a question of if we allow them to come. It's a question of, if they give us a heads up, and we're gonna follow all the available laws. We're not gonna, do anything that would, violate state or federal law as it relates to that. But my understanding is we have not been alerted to any, we have no indication at this point that they are coming into Laguna Beach. But again, we can't say for certain. But I think it's important also that we have, discussion based on facts. We don't have unnecessary fear going around. I was talking to Ivan from Mozambique, and he was saying that there's all these rumors about, his restaurant and that he was, uh, arrested and all this stuff. And it's just, um, it's just crazy how rumors can escalate very quickly. But at the same time, I think those rumors are happening because of just the uncertainty and the fear and the chaos by which this whole, you know, uh, approach has played out.
Okay. Any news on any more protests coming to town that you've heard about, or
I, I'm
is
not aware of any,
okay, good.
but I'm sure that the protests are gonna, Laguna Beach. There have always been peaceful protests in Laguna Beach. I think it's
Yeah.
actually part of our DNA, and so I expect this will continue, and I expect that we will do so in a very peaceful way, and a way that can make us proud of our country. Because what's great about America is that you can have the right to protest, where in other countries around the world you cannot, and so that's something that we should never take for granted.
Yes. Well said. Okay, let's move on to a couple of happier notes in town.
Okay.
One kind of fun thing is Laguna Beach got a new fire engine the other day, and there's a whole
Yes.
process with that. When a community gets a fire engine, it just doesn't show up. You jump in it and turn the key and drive it into the barn and everything. There's a process, and I understand you were a part of that. Talk to me about that process.
Yeah, so we cleaned it, and so I was a part of cleaning it. I was able to help get the areas that are high up on the fire truck, because of my height. So that's the role that I played there. And then we pushed it, we collaboratively pushed it into the station. And so, it's great to be investing in our fire department and our give them the tools that they need to, I guess it takes like 3 years to order a fire truck, which I find to be insane. I guess there's only a few companies that do it. There's a monopoly, and so I don't know the facts about that, but I was surprised that it takes that long to order. You would think it would be very simple, right? Anyway, that's a
Well,
whole other
it's
issue.
it's interesting too when I think about it, I think of say Laguna Beach ordering a fire engine is probably a lot different than Los Angeles ordering a new fire engine because up there it's wide streets. They're basically most of them are straightforward and things like that. Laguna Beach has a lot of unique areas you have to get to
That's a
with
good
the
point.
fire engine. So it's not like you can just say, okay, here in the showroom, we'll take this one over here. It's a long process.
I don't know, but yeah, maybe that might be true, but I think it's just a typical fire engine. So I don't know. That's a good question, though. I should look into that.
Okay, well, good. And lastly, we have a new project that's going to be underway. I think we have a groundbreaking early next week on the Anita Street staircase
Yeah, and the
going
sewer
down the
lift
street.
station and beach access. Yeah,
And
I think
saw a picture of it the other day. Kind of, it does look a little worn and tired and everything. I think it'll be a nice project to do, but people also need to be advised that if you're going to go to the beach that way, it's going to be closed for over a year. I don't think it's
that's
going to
good.
be completed until the following into the year 2026. So you either have to head south to the next staircase down or north to get to the beach. But your thoughts on that and what's at hand for the kickoff to that project?
Well, we'll have a brief ceremony Monday, 11 a.m. And as always, it's annoying to deal with construction impacts, but we have to invest in our town, and so it's important, especially things like sewer lift stations. You don't think about them until they go wrong, and then you're saying, oh, how did this happen? And what that requires is long-term, intentional investment. So I'm proud that we're doing that, and we need to do more of it as it relates to our sewer system and all of our infrastructure in town.
So they have all these things like these kickoff events and things like that, just to get the mayor's calendar full. Is that kind of the goal behind the whole
Exactly.
thing?
Exactly. To get
Well, I'm a big fan of yours. I always appreciate the effort that you put forward in attending to not only the types of kickoffs for a lift station, but to also, get your arms around the protest issues and the other big things that are happening in town. So I wish you continued success. Summer is on us. Everything moving forward as far as you're concerned with the impacts of tourism.
Yeah, I guess so. So we're gonna keep, mitigating it to the extent that we can. And yeah,
Okay. Well,
absolutely.
we'll keep up the good work. We appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Tom. Thank you.
See you next week.